Welcome to You, Me and the Counselling World, the podcast dedicated to student counsellors and their road to getting qualified and beyond. Today, we're going to be talking about how to maintain good boundaries whilst working online. Hello, I'm back. Sorry, it's been a while again. I'm never going to get tired of saying that. I'm just genuinely so sorry. I wish I could be here more often, guys. I really, really do. And I think it would be amazing if I could do that. But, you know, life gets in the way and the college is really busy at the moment with new enrolments. And I'm just really busy in my private practice as well, which is never a complaint from me. It's always a good thing. But sometimes it just means that it's super hard to juggle all of these plates. Is it juggling plates or juggling balls? Either way, it's not going too well. So I thought I'd come on and just do a really quick episode today. And this is actually off the back of a question that I had on my Facebook page. So I put a little post out asking anybody if they wanted to ask anything in particular for me to cover an episode on. And somebody lovely called Jennifer sent me in a little comment that basically said, can we have some tips on working online, because she's trying to write an assignment at the moment. So this is for you, Jennifer. If it's actually too late for your assignment and your assignment has already gone in, then I'm really sorry. But hopefully this will be helpful to some of you out there. And if you haven't written the assignment yet, then that's good. Unless, of course, it's due in with imminently, in which case you've left it too late. I'm not going to tell you off, don't worry. Here we are, and it's time to really think about working online, because it means so much now, doesn't it? Since COVID, we're all finding ourselves working online so much more than ever before. And I think that if you had asked me before COVID hit whether I would ever see clients online, the answer would always be most definitely 100% not. It would never have been something which I would have wanted to do at that time. But then COVID came along, and suddenly we were all flung into something that felt really quite different, and it was the only way we could connect with our clients. And I quickly realised that the reality is you can actually do some really good therapeutic work online, but it's about how we maintain and hold our boundaries to keep the work safe, but to keep it therapeutic, and to ensure that what we're doing with our clients is still just as worthwhile, just as quality as it would be if we were in the room. So in order to kind of touch base on this, I guess we need to think about some of the pitfalls about working online. Now, with this particular subject matter, I'm talking particularly about working online on Zoom or other mechanisms where you could see, so video call, things like Teams, all of the others. There's so many platforms out there now, isn't there, that we can work and see each other on the screen. When I'm talking about working online today, that is really what I'm talking about predominantly. But of course, some of these probably still do apply for things like the phone. Now, if we think about this from kind of the beginning of the therapeutic relationship online, we need to think carefully about how we contract for this and make sure that the contracting that we have for online counselling is just going to be a little bit different to the contracting we have for face-to-face. But ultimately, many of the contract details will still be the same. But it's really, really important that you know where your client is going to be working from. Sometimes people do sessions from their office at work, or sometimes they do it from their home. Sometimes people pull up in a car park somewhere and they do them there. So it's about knowing where your client is going to be, ensuring they're not going to be driving during an online session. There's a temptation, I think, in this modern day. The clients certainly roll out an option to think, oh, well, maybe I could just do that online whilst I'm driving back from a meeting. But the reality is that we need to be pulled over in a safe place where it's confidential to get the best out of the therapy, but also to ensure that it's safe for people. They're working through deep and emotional things. We don't want a situation where we feel that the client is in a vulnerable and unsafe position. And we really need them to concentrate on the therapy, really. So what's important is that you know from the beginning where your client is planning to see you from. If they're at their home address, then great, you'll have the home details available. And I always say this to supervisees, that in the event of a client becoming unwell on a call, How would you get help for them if you didn't know where they were? And I think that's something really important to think about, bearing in mind the counselling is just between you and them. You may be the only other person that knows that they've fallen unwell during a call. You need to be able to arrange to get some help to them. Always know where your client is, and you need to work out the best way for that. And it might be that you agree that they always work from their home address, and you'll have their home address on file. And in the event of them working from somewhere different, that you can ask them where that is going to be. So that's one way of getting around it in that respect. But it's up to you to think about how you want to contract for this, and setting out those contracts from the beginning about ensuring that people know what to expect from online counselling. It can become a little bit more casual because people are in their own home. And how do we maintain the boundaries when people are in their own environment? Sorry, we've got dogs barking now in the background. I hope you can't hear that too badly. Whenever I sit down to do these things, I seem to end up with random noise from somewhere, even though it's been quiet all day here today. But I can't stop, because every time I stop, then I lose my flow of where I got to. So I hope you can put up with the dogs in the background. So we're thinking carefully then, aren't we, about somebody being in their own home environment. What does that mean for the therapy? Does that mean they're going to have a cup of tea and it's going to be a bit more casual? Does it mean that they might be cooking dinner whilst they're speaking to you? What does it mean in terms of their pets being at home? You know, will you have dogs barking, for example, in the background whilst you're trying to get on? What does all of this mean? Because essentially, you're entering into their home environment via the internet. And they equally are entering into the environment that you choose to work from. So we need to think about, what can we control within somebody's home environment or office environment, of course, but what can we not control? And I think that's really important to think about, because what does it mean for the counselling relationship? I think the most important thing that I want to sort of kick off this conversation with is really about confidentiality. You and I both know just how important confidentiality is for the sake of the therapeutic relationship. For good therapy to take place, clients and counsellor need to be in a place which is completely confidential and not able to be overheard by anybody else. If there are people in the house when the client is working, that can cause a little bit of discomfort. There's always a worry that somebody is going to overhear them, or even if their partner or something is working upstairs, there's still that fear that they could be overheard. And sometimes clients talk in like a hushed tone because they're worried about being overheard. So we need to set the space for the most conducive element in this is about how we go about making sure the client has got everything that they need. So there's some ways that we can do that, and that again is with the contracting, and again through explaining what we hope in an ideal world the therapy space will look like for them. So the first thing to think about is there's absolutely no point in attempting to do any online therapy if you or your client have a bad signal as far as internet is concerned. So if you've got really weak broadband, or your client has got really weak broadband, it becomes so disruptive, because you'll have times when this session is freezing, you'll have times when you can't hear what they've said, they can't hear what you've said, and it really does get in the way. So one thing that you could think about within the very beginning of the relationship is asking them about what the internet is like at where they are. For those of us that offer initial meetings, which I know that I do, it's a chance for us to have a conversation to see whether or not in fact their internet, or indeed my internet, is strong enough. I know that I've got good signal. You know, we invest in really good internet here, but that doesn't mean to say that everybody does. So you need to be aware of that. If you're speaking to somebody on a farm in a big remote place somewhere, that doesn't mean to say that you're going to get necessarily bad internet, but there is a chance that you're going to get a connection which is less than ideal. So thinking about that to start with, and then thinking about, could the client be overheard by anybody else? And so you can write it within your contract that you require there to be nobody else in the building when they're having their therapy. I mean, it depends, doesn't it? A building could be a big block of flats where there's other houses and other dwellings within it. That doesn't mean to say you can't have anybody in the whole building, of course. But if you've got, a 2-bedroom house and one person is sitting in the bedroom upstairs and then the other person is in the room next door, the chances are is that they're going to be overheard. So we need to think about what the space is going to be like for the client. Do they have somewhere comfortable to sit? Because they're sitting for an hour and they're talking about themselves. Do they have somewhere comfortable to sit? I try to encourage people ideally to come on via their laptop so they're not sort of having to hold a phone or balance a phone in position. And it's nice to be able to see them fully. And so having a good, laptop with webcam, it can be really, really helpful for that. But not essential, but it can be helpful. But thinking again about the client being in their own space, what does that mean for the boundaries? Does it mean that they could have a neighbour pop round? Does it mean that they could have their children in the house? Could they be having childcare issues and decide that they want to have their child with them during the therapy? Maybe their partner's going to come back and walk past, and I've had that before with a client's partner just sort of appeared behind and walked past. That can be really, really difficult and really challenging because essentially you've got to stop the session whilst that takes place. And then check in again, can you be overheard? Are you in a safe and confidential place for this? Sometimes I speak to clients about perhaps wearing headphones to, offer an additional layer of privacy for them. And of course, reassuring the client that I'm also in a safe and confidential place where I am to ensure that they don't feel as if the conversation could be overheard the other way. I certainly would never do a client call anywhere in the public. It would always be in the privacy of my home or perhaps from an office where I work from. So it just depends, but the majority of times I will be always in my home and the client themselves usually will be in their home. And you've got a little bit more control, but you haven't got as much control as you've got when they come to see you in your space. When you're seeing them face to face, it's your room, it's your setup, you know it. You know what to expect on the whole, although there's always can be interruptions from other people. But on the whole, you know what to expect. But on the online setting, it's so much more difficult. You might have somebody come to the door with a delivery. Amazon might turn up. Other good retailers are available. Then what? What does that mean for your therapy? Do you allow the client to go and answer the door? And I say allow, in inverted commas, really. Do you let them go and answer the door and you say, oh no, that's absolutely fine, go and do that? Or do you say from the outset, look, if your doorbell rings, do you mind that we just carry on the session and not stop? It's about what we do, but recognising that the client is in their own home environment and it somewhat changes what we are able to do within the space as well. So what do you think about this concept of a client not being able to get any childcare and suddenly turning up one day with their toddler in tow, and you can see the toddler in the room and they say, oh, it's okay, he or she will just play and, I've got toys and I've got snacks for them. What does that mean in terms of your therapy? Is the client prioritising that time for themselves? Maybe they desperately needed a session and therefore, rather than cancel the session, they thought it was better to have that than have nothing. But what do you do about that? How do you go about tackling that? And that's definitely something to think about, isn't it? Would you accept it on that first time and then sort of say, look, next time, please just let me know and we can cancel and rearrange a session? Or would you rather, do it to allow the client that space to be able to come forward and be able to come to therapy when they need it? So that's something to think about for sure. And there's no right or wrong answer with a lot of this. It's about how you decide how to set up your contracting and how to maintain those boundaries moving forward. What is essential, I think, is that the client is in a safe and confidential place where they're not going to be interrupted, they're not going to be disturbed, and that they can give their all to the therapy in the same way as they would if they came into your room and saw you face to face. And I think that would be the ideal, but it's not always. I live in the real world, and it's not always completely possible. So really think about reiterating confidentiality, really asking them, who's around, who's in the room, who can hear you, is there anybody there? Especially if you're talking about a partner or something, you don't want that partner in the house at the same time in an ideal world. And if it is that there is a partner in the house, then how can you get round that together? You can ask the question specifically to the client, can you be overheard from the room that you're in? Would you like to wear headphones? If they say, yes, I can be overheard, then what do we do about the session? Do we carry on? I would say probably not, because actually the reality is that confidentiality is the most important thing about therapy. in terms of holding a safe and secure space. Confidentiality is a really, really important boundary that we're holding at all times. So have a think about that and play around with that as an idea in your mind about how you might deal with that moving forward. So what about if you go to contact your client, they come on the call and they're busy making dinner? What do you do about that? You've got the phone propped up on a recipe book and they're chopping potatoes and they're saying, I'll get this done at the same time if that's okay. And we may smile. I'm smiling as I'm saying this, but it happens. It really does happen where clients are not fully available to the therapy. They live busy lives. They're rushing around and they're not fully available to the therapy space. They're in their own home. They see it that they can just get on with whatever they need to do whilst they're chatting and talking to you. In their mind, for some clients, this is a chat that they're paying for. It's not a chat because it's therapy and it needs to be therapeutic. But bear that in mind that people can do that. And what would you do? What would you say? Would you insist that they sit down and that you work with it? Would you allow that client autonomy and let them choose? It's quite a difficult dilemma to think about how we would handle that. And if it's going to be a one-off, does that change it for you? Or if it's going to be a frequent occurrence, then what? So there's a lot of things, again, about the contracting at the beginning where you can set out some of these things, which might be really, really helpful for you. So there's a few things so far that feel like they're quite tricky to deal with, don't they? Something else that I think can happen quite a lot online is something called the disinhibition effect. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but it's an effect where clients say so much more than they were anticipating they were going to say. They share so much more. Because they're online, they can't fully see you, and they're not as censored as they would be in the room, face to face. And this can also apply to therapists who also find themselves sharing more than they thought they were going to, and maybe disclosing more about themselves than they usually previously had. And again, that's something to really be aware of. How can we handle that? How can we encourage a client to slow down and to share what they feel comfortable with? Because sometimes they can share an awful lot quickly and then retreat and actually scare themselves away from the therapy process. And if we as therapists find ourselves sharing more than we might normally do, that's definitely something to take into supervision and try to work out what is going on. Why do I feel the need to say more than I normally would? What is happening for me around that? So that's important to know and to be aware that it's going to take a lot of self-awareness on our part as therapists to work that out. So we've looked at a lot of bits and bobs here. What happens if you go to call, or you're doing your video call and the client answers the call and you can see clearly that they are in a public space? Maybe a car park with people milling around, maybe a supermarket getting their shopping, maybe standing at the school gates waiting for their child to arrive. What does that mean in terms of your therapeutic process? And again, it can happen. People might be running late and then they think, I'll just start my counselling here and I'll carry it on when I get home. And those sorts of things do happen. So again, thinking about how you might handle that, again, is a real dilemma. Personally, if they're in a public space where they could be overheard, then I would say to them, shall we rearrange the session for a different date? And try to find a mutually convenient date to rebook, and reiterate the importance of making the time and space for this therapy to take place. Because it feels really important that we honour this process. They're honouring themselves through the therapy, but we need to honour that therapy space as well. So again, something to think about. And I know that I'm probably not giving you a lot of answers here. I'm giving you lots of scenarios to think about for your own contracting and for your own movement into online work. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to be prepared for. And all of these things are things for you to think about how you would handle that. I'm trying to give you some thinking points, really, to think about what that might mean for you and how that might feel for you as a therapist if it happened. Hopefully this is helpful. So the last sort of point that I wanted to touch upon is how on earth do we build a good rapport with clients online? When we see them face to face, we can see the whole of them, can't we? We can see whether they're tapping their toes and how comfortable they feel. We can make eye contact with them a lot more. Sometimes online it can feel different. So how do we go about building a good rapport with them? And I think that it means that in the same way as with face to face, we use the core conditions, let them know that there's no judgment, offer them empathy, offer them that lovely warmth that you can give them. Be there with them. I think that's the most important thing, is that find that way. And I tend to position the camera so that I can look directly into the camera and minimise the little screen, because I use Zoom, so I minimise the little screen with my face on it, put it right at the top by the camera, and then that way I'm looking at the client and I'm not sort of looking at how I look or noticing whether my lipstick is smudged down my chin or whether I've got mascara down my face, which I often have. I try to bring myself in the zone of the client and really just, looking at the client, looking at their expressions, looking at how comfortable they feel, continuing to share that in the same way as I would normally. If I notice a client becoming upset on Zoom, then I will always, I notice it and I will say, I can see that this is really upsetting for you, or I can see some real emotion for you as we said that, what's going on? How are you feeling? It's those types of questions that we can still build that lovely rapport. And the beauty of it is you can still see them and they can still see you. So just think about how you arrange your screen so that you're not looking at yourself, because I think if you're looking at yourself, then that is often really quite difficult to build that rapport, because we get a bit in our heads, don't we? If you're anything like me, I get a bit in my head about that sort of stuff and criticising in my own mind what I might look like or how my hair is, and not in a vain way, but in a kind of, I guess it's where my own lack of self-esteem comes in, and I might sort of pick myself apart a little bit. And it's best if I just can't see myself very well. I think that makes the therapy a lot easier, because it's not all about me, it's about the client. And I need to prioritise them. And so that's a really, really important aspect of this as well, and something to think about for sure. So I think we've covered a lot of it. I think the one that I have on my list still, which I'm still not sure how well we've covered, is about children, being in the room, what we do about that. And some people might have a baby and they say, can I bring the baby into therapy and just have them on my lap? There won't be any bother and that'll be okay. And sometimes we can work with that. But if you've got a toddler who's speaking and shouting and running around and the client is distracted by them, what does that mean for the therapy space? What does that mean for the client? What does it mean for them honouring this space for themselves? They're paying their hard-earned cash, often, unless of course you're on placement, you're offering it for free. If you're in private practice, they are paying their hard-earned cash for this. And it's really important that they get what they need and that they make this the priority. And I get it. People are parents, they've got childcare concerns. I understand that fully. But it's just about having that awareness and thinking about what it means to prioritise the therapy. Whether or not you would allow a baby, for example, into the space whilst this was taking place. So I think I've thrown quite a bit at you there, haven't I? There's a lot more to say than I thought there was. I hope that some of these ideas have been helpful and they've given you something to muse upon. So much of this is going to be about you sort of, thinking about it in supervision perhaps, and thinking about how you want to sort of set up this and what feels like you. I don't want to be telling you what I think you should do, but certainly having these points to think about may well be really, really helpful for you. I'm going to sign off for today. It is nearly the end of the day on Friday. I'm going to try and get this podcast up for you today. I'm saying this now to hold me to it, so I'm going to start the edit straight away when I finish talking. But have the best few days, guys. I will look forward to catching up with you soon. And as usual, if you would love to leave me a 5-star review, please do so on the podcast provider of your choice. Take the best care of yourselves, everybody. Stay in touch. Come and find me on Facebook and make sure you comment. See you soon. Bye-bye.